right, what I want to talk to you guys about today is the difference between good and effective. All right, because they're not necessarily the same thing. Right? It's like, have you guys ever seen the movie like White Men Can't Jump? Where they're talking about like slam dunking versus like doing the layup, right? And the white guy's like, you know, slam dunking is like trying to like show off just to show off. He makes the very racist comment that like black people would rather like look good and lose than look bad and win, right? Well, what I'm going to try and encourage you guys to do in game, because I'm white, is you don't have to look that good. You don't have to be all flashy. You just have to be effective. You just have to do what works. All right, so it's not about necessarily getting the girl like screaming and like all over you in the club, and it's not necessarily about like making out with the girl in the first minute, anything like that. It's just about doing, excuse me, what's effective. Right, doing what you need to do to get from A to B to C to D and all the way to Z, which would be, I guess, just go from A to F. F's a good place to stop with a girl, right? So we'll go to there. So that's what I want to talk to you about. And I kind of have a unique perspective on this because I came into game when game was very structured. When game was about negs and back turns and structuring interaction, even doing hypnosis, all these sort of techniques to get a girl. Whereas now we've kind of morphed from there to a much more natural approach, much more just be friendly and cool, escalate where necessary, lead the interaction, that's kind of it, right? And the interesting thing that, I don't think a lot of people had this perspective, but my perspective always with the canned game stuff was, it was flawed for a few different reasons. Number one, it was flawed because anything that's coming out of the can, you have to keep having stuff out of the can in order to keep doing it, right? Like if you're doing it based on I have a good story, I have a good story, I have a good story, oh shit, I ran out of stories, and now your entire personality is going to change in like a split second, and that's going to mess up the interaction. That's one problem. Problem number two, obviously, was if you're trying to use lines and routines and techniques to get a girl, you never get to this point where you think I am enough. You always think the routines were enough, or the lines were enough, or the little like crazy manipulative shit I did to get the girl was enough, and not I as a person was enough. So those are two big problems. But the big problem that I saw with it that I don't think a lot of people ever recognized is that, to me, the problem with canned game was it was too good. Okay? It was too good. It was too powerful. Right? Because what we were saying was so comedically tight and so scripted and so like on point from moment to moment to moment. As soon as we deviated from it, it was this huge chasm, this huge gap between our personalities. It's like you have your one like super on like performance level personality, and then you have your normal guy personality. And every time you would switch between the two, it would be incongruent, right? And I kind of have a model for that, which I'm going to show you guys here. I'll bring it up on the screen. It's not going to be the prettiest thing in the world because I drew it on paint like 2 minutes before I came up here, but deal with it. I'll show you this. By the way, guys, I was an engineer, so I think in graphs and numbers a lot. So here's a graph for you guys. On the one axis, we have EI, meaning emotional intensity. Emotional intensity. And then T is time, like every graph you've ever seen in engineering, if you're an engineer. So emotional intensity versus time. And the way I would look at an interaction, I told you this yesterday, that girls don't feel emotions per se. What they feel is changes in emotions. They feel whether the interaction is getting better or worse. They don't feel how good the interaction is. And that's why I talked to you guys a little bit about how like I'll start my dates really shitty, like really super boring, because then everything's uphill from there, and they just notice that gradually, the longer they're with me, the more turned on they're getting, right? Same thing here. So, hang on, let's see if I can do this. If I can save this and then unsave it, that should theoretically do this. That'll work. All right, so can game would look a little bit like this. It'd be like really, really high emotional intensity, really, really high, building. And then as soon as you drop to your normal personality, there's this huge drop right here, right? That huge drop, right when you have that, that's when you're gonna lose the girl. Because she's gonna notice, holy shit, this isn't as much fun as it was 5 seconds ago, right? This suddenly got weird, or 30 seconds ago, which is probably a little bit of a lag time. But it suddenly went from being fun to not being fun. Right? And so that's where you lose the girl. How many of you guys have done that? You go in, you go in, attract the girl, you tease her, have fun with her, banter back and forth, and then as soon as you try and get real with the girl, as soon as you try and have a normal conversation, it just loses its intensity, the conversation gets boring, and it just doesn't work. Anybody ever had that? Right, exactly. It's huge, it happens all the time. Okay, So the way that I think that it should look in a good interaction is this. First of all, you have to go in with enough emotional intensity or enough like energy or dominance or something to get their attention. That's a given, right? That's what makes cold approach harder than a social circle approach. That's the big thing that makes it harder. You have to get their attention. You have to get them on you, right? And there's two things. Number one, you need to be high energy, which is a burden on you. But the other thing is you need to be committing in some way and like, in a certain sense, the very fact that you're approaching is kind of lower value because you want them more than they want you. Those are the two issues that make cold approach tougher, right? So here is what I would say it should look like in terms of emotional intensity. You have to start out high, and then you're gradually actually going to bring it down. Because if you think about having sex with a girl, or the situation leading up to sex, most times it's not like happy clown mode. Most time it's not like da 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 da, now I'll fuck you. It doesn't work like that, right? You have to calm it down. You have to bring the interaction down. The other option, by the way, and this happens with a lot of the quick lays, like the 5-minute, 10-minute, even half-hour pulls, is that you actually do keep it really high, but what you do is you get super, super dominant and physical. And you, instead of being clown mode, you're dominant physical mode, and you're keeping the intensity that way. So that's the other option. But if you're gonna have a girl that doesn't end up sleeping with you in like 5-10 minutes, if it's not something super quick, it's gonna be hard to maintain that level of intensity. It's gonna be actually physically difficult, all right? Actually, the way I look at this line, in a certain sense, I call it emotional intensity. It's sort of like calories burned during set, okay? It's like at the start, there's a lot of like interaction, a lot of energy going back and forth, and then gradually you bring it down to more of a calm vibe, and you burning less calories, even though the intensity is the same or higher. And the question is, how do you keep that intensity the same or higher as you bring it down? Does anybody have any idea how to do that? Okay. I'll tell you, because there's another line on the graph. And this is physical escalation. And it looks something like this. So what you need to be doing is, as you're gradually bringing the intensity of the set down, as you're gradually like not expending as much energy, not being as like fun or like active or telling as many stories or trying as hard in the set, when you're pulling back and you're letting her chase. Now what you can do to supplement that so it doesn't get boring, so the conversation doesn't get mundane, is increase physical touch. Right? And we'll do this a lot. You guys will see me, if you see me in set, a lot of times I'll be discussing the most boring topic with a girl. Just nothing going on, no big deal, but I'll be like stroking her thigh while I'm talking to her about it, or just like hugging her and running my hands up and down her back while I'm talking to her about like some theory in physics or whatever, right? It's a completely logical, boring, mundane conversation, just shit like I like to talk about as a super nerd. But the point is I have that look in her eyes and the physical contact that still keeps the emotional vibe there, all right? And so that's what you need to do there. The big thing though here is you don't want big, I think I'm pointing at it, I'm not actually pointing at it. The big thing you want on that curve that's going down is you don't want big drop-offs. You don't want big drops. If you have big drops, that's where you lose the girl. So you need to kind of gradually bring it down, all right? The other thing that was kind of an issue in terms of the can structure game, which is something that's totally solvable actually, and could be solved, is that it was sort of viewed as too linear. It was viewed as first you attract, and then you build comfort, right? As if there was this distinct gap between the two phases, right? That's wrong. That's just ridiculous. Right? You don't go from like, I'm one persona, one person here, and then I just completely shift and become a different persona here. But that's what people were doing. That's what was going on. What it really should be, it should be thought of more as a gray area. Right? It's more of a gray area. It's at the start, you're doing a high percentage of high value things. And then later on, you're doing a high percentage of high comfort things, but you're still always mixing the two. All right? And that's how you should view it. So it's a gradual, slow transition. It's, again, similar to, I mentioned the metaphor yesterday, the boiling a frog metaphor, right? You throw the frog in the wild and raise it to a boil very slowly, very gradually, right? No sudden gaps, right? If you have sudden changes in the set, they better be in a positive direction, not a negative one, because that's where you lose the girl, is on sudden negatives. Does that make sense? And sudden negative doesn't necessarily mean sudden negative emotion. It doesn't mean you can't insult a girl, you can't tell a girl you and I won't get along, you can't tell a girl like any of the things that Julian probably tells every set that he ever talks to. It just means you can't have huge sudden drops in energy. okay, that has to be gradually brought down over time, okay? And that's the difference to me between good game and effective game, right? I think a lot of guys, they learn some game techniques, they learn like be cocky, be funny, and that's a very powerful tool. It's a powerful tool, but they don't understand it, they don't know how to control it. So I sort of metaphorically consider that like a guy who has like a bazooka, but he doesn't really know how to aim it, all right? And interestingly enough, that bazooka is going to be harder to learn to aim than a smaller gun would, right? Whereas someone who's very well calibrated but doesn't necessarily push as hard on those attraction switches, it's more like having like a rifle, which granted you're not going to bring down a tank with a rifle, but if you're just aiming at people or animals, let's do animals. It's a little more politically correct. You actually can aim the rifle, right? You don't need like an anti-aircraft missile to bring down a deer, for example. So that's kind of the way I look at all of this. And the interesting thing, like I said, is that kind of the more powerful what you're doing is, the harder it is to control. So there's always this gap in your learning between doing what's powerful and doing what's maybe effective for you at the points in your learning curve. So what I actually suggest you guys do as a learning exercise, because I'm all about process, right? What I suggest you guys do is go for periods of both when you go out and learn. Certain times, go out and just try and pull whatever you're capable of pulling, right? Say you're at a level where you can consistently pull 7s and 8s. Go out and just pull 7s and 8s. And just do it and just like do that effective thing. You have the smaller gun, but be very precise with it and get very, very consistent with it. And then other days, and recognize that you're specifically doing other days, go out and try and do 9s and 10s, even if you've never like had success there. Or go and try and do sets where like girls are with their boyfriends, or in incredibly difficult logistics, or where you have to like wade through, 6 guys that are 7 feet tall to get to them, right? Do those tough situations too, and those like high degree of risk, I guess, I don't know, high difficulty sets. Do that too, but recognize it's a different thing, and recognize that when you have those, you are going to have, you're coming from a much higher level of energy, so the process of bringing it down is going to be much harder and much more steep, but you need to learn it on the easy ones too. So in learning game, it's kind of this balance of the two, right? You want to learn good game, but you also want to learn effective game. And I think a lot of guys, what they get caught up doing is they become like what I call IOI junkies. Like IOI, by the way, this is an old term for indicator of interest, right? Indicator of interest. What they do is they find some little thing, little button they can push to get a girl to laugh, and they like that. Because the girl's laughing, getting turned on, whatever, and then they just push that button. And they push it, and push it, and push it, and push it, and push it, until it just, one, the set goes nowhere, because you're just staying in like the same phase, the same energy level in the set. But two, eventually it's just obvious what you're doing. Eventually the girl's like, oh yeah, he just found a gimmick. He found my little, oh, okay, cool, this is cool, okay, bye. Nice talking to you, right? You need to be versatile. You can't just hit that button. You need to be a complete person.